There is a moment, usually invisible, usually ignored, when your home stops being a place of shelter and starts becoming a source of data. Not through hacking, not through surveillance cameras, not through any sophisticated intrusion, but through something far simpler and far more dangerous: observation. Before you ever speak, before you ever interact, before a stranger even knows your name, your house has already introduced you. It has described your routines, your resources, your vulnerabilities, and your patterns with a level of clarity that would surprise most homeowners. The danger is not that this information exists. The danger is how easily it can be collected, how consistently it is broadcast, and how rarely it is questioned. From a scientific and behavioral standpoint, humans are pattern detection systems. The brain is optimized to extract meaning from repetition, to convert fragments into models, and to predict outcomes based on limited inputs. This is the same cognitive framework used in fields like military reconnaissance, urban planning, and threat assessment. When applied to residential environments, it transforms ordinary visual details into structured intelligence. A light turning off at a consistent time is no longer just a habit, it becomes a timestamp. A car leaving every morning is no longer routine, it becomes a schedule. The environment itself becomes a dataset, and your house is the primary source. Most people misunderstand risk at this level. They assume that vulnerability requires intent, that someone must deliberately target them, follow them, or single them out. In reality, most risk begins passively. It begins with someone noticing something small, then something else, then connecting those observations into a coherent picture. This is not paranoia. This is basic cognitive processing. Studies in environmental psychology show that repeated exposure to the same setting allows individuals to construct highly accurate behavioral predictions within just a few observations. 3 to 5 repetitions are often enough to establish a reliable pattern. Your home, if consistent, provides far more than that. The hidden science behind this lies in signal emission and noise reduction. Every environment emits signals: visual, temporal, behavioral, and the human brain filters out noise to isolate what is useful. The more consistent and visible your patterns are, the stronger your signals become. Conversely, randomness and variability act as noise, making interpretation difficult. This principle is used in cybersecurity, where unpredictable systems are harder to exploit, and in wildlife biology, where prey species survive by avoiding predictable movement patterns. Your house operates under the same rules. Predictability is not just convenience, it is exposure. Empirical evidence supports this. Interviews with convicted burglars conducted by criminology departments have consistently shown that targets are rarely chosen at random. Instead, they are selected based on observable indicators: absence patterns, maintenance levels, accessibility, and perceived value. These are not guesses. They are decisions informed by data collected in plain sight. The implication is clear. Your home is not judged by what is inside it, but by what it appears to reveal from the outside. Perception becomes reality, and reality drives action. This leads to a critical survival implication. Security is not defined by strength alone. It is defined by uncertainty. A house that cannot be easily read, cannot be easily predicted, and cannot be easily categorized becomes inherently less attractive as a target. Not because it is impenetrable, but because it disrupts the decision-making process. When the cost of interpretation increases, the likelihood of engagement decreases. This is not theory. It is observed behavior across multiple domains, from urban crime patterns to military target selection. The escalation happens quietly. One visible pattern leads to another and another, until a complete profile begins to form. A home that once appeared ordinary starts to reveal structure. Entry points become obvious. Timelines become clear. Absences become predictable. And once predictability is established, vulnerability follows. Not immediately, not dramatically, but inevitably. The process is incremental, and that is what makes it dangerous. By the time the pattern is clear, the information has already been collected. And this is where the shift must happen. Because the question is no longer what your home protects, but what your home communicates. Every visible detail, every repeated action, every consistent signal contributes to a narrative that others can read. The issue is not whether your house is secure. The issue is whether your house is silent. And for most people, it is not. It is speaking constantly, broadcasting information in ways that feel normal but function as exposure. The next step is understanding exactly how that communication happens and why the most ordinary parts of your property are often the most revealing. Because the first signals are not hidden, not complex, and not technological. They are simple, physical, and sitting in plain view, quietly telling your story to anyone who knows how to listen. The first layer of that communication begins at the boundary between private space and public access, where information is unintentionally transferred through routine systems designed for convenience rather than security. The most overlooked principle here is exposure time. Any object, pattern, or signal that remains visible long enough becomes data. This includes mail accumulation, waste disposal habits, and delivery cycles. From an analytical standpoint, these are not isolated details. They are time-stamped indicators that allow an observer to construct behavioral timelines. When mail remains uncollected beyond a normal interval, it signals absence. When waste output spikes or reveals branded packaging, it signals consumption patterns and potential asset value. These are measurable, repeatable indicators that require no intrusion to access. The misunderstanding is that these systems are neutral. They are not. They are interfaces between your private life and the public domain, and like any interface, they can leak information. The hidden science behind this is rooted in data correlation. A single piece of information has limited value, but multiple data points combined create exponential clarity. This is the same principle used in predictive analytics and intelligence gathering. A package on a doorstep is just a package. But 3 packages, delivered at similar times, left unattended for consistent durations, begin to reveal occupancy gaps. Add waste output and mail accumulation, and the pattern becomes statistically reliable. Evidence from urban crime studies reinforces this. Offenders frequently rely on low-effort observation methods, prioritizing targets that provide clear, consistent signals over those that require uncertainty or guesswork. This is not about sophistication. It is about efficiency. A house that presents readable patterns reduces decision friction. It answers questions before they are even asked. Is someone home? When do they leave? Do they have valuable items? These answers emerge passively through observation, without any direct interaction. The survival implication is direct. You do not need to eliminate visibility. You need to disrupt interpretation. This means reducing the clarity of signals and increasing variability. When patterns become inconsistent, they lose predictive power. A delivery that is quickly retrieved does not confirm absence. Waste that is anonymized does not reveal consumption. Mail that is secured does not indicate occupancy. Each small disruption adds friction to the observer's analysis, forcing them to either invest more time or move on to an easier target. But the system does not stop at objects. It extends into identity signals, intentional displays that people assume are harmless or even beneficial. Vehicles, signage, decals, and visible affiliations all contribute to what can be described as externalized identity mapping. From a behavioral science perspective, humans categorize quickly. Visual identifiers accelerate that process. A single symbol can communicate profession, interests, beliefs, and routines. This is efficient for social interaction, but it is equally efficient for threat assessment. The common misconception is that these signals act as deterrents. In reality, they often function as classifiers. They do not prevent attention, they guide it. A visible indicator of a specific hobby suggests periodic absence. A professional marker suggests income range and asset likelihood. Even family structure can be inferred through simple visual cues. These are not assumptions. They are probability models built from observable data. The more signals you provide, the more accurate the model becomes. The hidden mechanism here is cognitive shortcutting. The brain reduces complex environments into simplified categories to make rapid decisions. When your property provides clear identifiers, it accelerates this process. Instead of ambiguity, there is definition. Instead of uncertainty, there is assumption. And in risk-based decision-making, assumption is often enough to act. Evidence across multiple behavioral studies shows that individuals prefer predictable environments when making opportunistic decisions. Predictability reduces cognitive load and increases confidence. This applies not only to benign behavior but also to malicious intent. A predictable target is easier to approach, easier to time, and easier to exploit. The implication is not that identity signals are inherently dangerous, but that they reduce the margin of error for anyone observing. As this pattern of exposure continues, it begins to integrate with environmental indicators, maintenance, lighting, and spatial usage. These elements operate on a different level. They do not just reveal information, they simulate presence or absence. A maintained environment suggests oversight. A neglected one suggests neglect. This is not subjective. It is rooted in environmental psychology. Humans associate order with control and disorder with vulnerability. These associations influence behavior at a subconscious level. Lighting, in particular, functions as a temporal map. It reveals activity cycles, movement patterns, and occupancy rhythms. Consistent lighting schedules become behavioral signatures. Over time, these signatures allow an observer to predict not just when a house is occupied, but how it is occupied. Which rooms are used, in what sequence, and at what times. This is not speculation. It is pattern recognition applied to visual data. The misunderstanding is that lighting is purely functional. In reality, it is communicative. It broadcasts activity in real time. The hidden science is tied to circadian behavior and routine formation. Humans are creatures of habit, and those habits manifest physically through light usage. When those habits are consistent, they become readable. When they are varied, they become noise. The survival implication is to introduce controlled unpredictability. Not randomness without purpose, but variation that disrupts pattern formation. When lighting does not follow a fixed schedule, it becomes harder to model. When maintenance does not lapse during absence, it removes confirmation signals. Each adjustment reduces the reliability of external observation. This escalation leads to a critical threshold where multiple weak signals combine into a strong profile. No single indicator is decisive, but together they form a coherent narrative. A house with predictable lighting, visible identity markers, consistent absence patterns, and readable external systems becomes highly legible. And legibility is the core risk. Because once a system is understood, it can be anticipated. At this point, the focus must shift from individual fixes to systemic thinking. It is not enough to address one signal in isolation. The objective is to reduce overall signal clarity across the entire environment. This requires viewing your property not as a static structure, but as a dynamic system of outputs. Every element contributes to the whole, and the whole determines how you are perceived. And the final stage of this analysis moves beyond visibility into something more subtle but equally powerful: the interpretation of movement, presence, and response. Because what people notice is not just what is there, but how it behaves over time. And that behavior, once understood, becomes the most valuable information of all.